Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast, the self-development podcast for women who want more. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien. I'm a no-nonsense life coach, a seasoned entrepreneur, photographer, rescue dog mum, and women's empowerment champion. Each week, I share self-development strategies, amazing guest interviews, and uplifting conversations that will help you up-level all areas of your life. Let's dive in. Hi, folks. Welcome to episode 76 of the podcast. Today, my guest is Emmy Hernandez, and we're talking about the delicate balance between resolution and compromise in romantic relationships. First, a bit about my guest. Emmy is a master life and mindset coach who specializes in empowering women to attract their soulmate and cultivate epic, passionate love. Through her trauma-informed approach and mastery of NLP and magnetic mind recodes, she helps rewire limiting beliefs and patterns, preventing wholehearted intimacy. Emmy guides her clients on a journey of self-discovery to become vibrationally aligned with their dream partnership. And she is the host of the Confessions of a Loveaholic podcast. Welcome to this podcast, Emmy.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and chat with you and your audience.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's such an interesting topic. I know I've been on your podcast, so we have talked before, and most people listening to my podcast will know that I got married not so long ago. And relationships really are at the heart of our lives, not just romantically, but in work, with our friends, with our family. And where there's relationships, there's always going to be conflict. And I think it's a really, really great topic to be tackling today of how we deal with that conflict, because I think there can be a real tendency to run away and hide from it. So our topic today is talking about resolution versus compromise. And I would love for you to kick us off by sharing what the difference is between the two of those things.
Yes. So funny enough, this concept came about from my own understanding of what I wanted in my relationship with my husband. And after coming from many, many unhealed and very toxic relationships, by the time that I met my husband, I knew that I was a different person and I wanted our relationship to be different. And I didn't want to run away. And I also didn't want to instill the silent treatment. I learned the silent treatment from my mother, and I had used that tactic of silent treatment as a way to sort of abuse and manipulate the situation. So when resolution versus compromise came about, it was really heartfelt in the recognition of when I see and hear about compromise in the media, it's very much a joke, right? Where it's like, oh, well, my wife wanted a dog and I didn't, so we compromised and we got a dog. And that is compromise in and of itself. The definition is lose-lose, okay? A compromise, it's not a win-win situation. So when people talk about win-win, what they're actually referring to is a resolution, okay? So compromise by definition is lose-lose. Resolution means, okay, what does each party actually need from this? Sometimes the need is below the surface of the ask. And I can give you an example here after we start this part. I can give you an example of how resolutions show up with me and my husband versus compromise. And the examples are so silly, but the metaphor will come across.
I have found myself, and as I'm listening to you talking, where my husband and I live was what I would refer to and we refer to as a compromise. When we met, we lived 70 kilometers apart. He kind of needed to be near work. I was living where my work's a bit more flexible, but where all my friends were, and we needed to find a meeting point in the middle. And it has been something that has been brought up repeatedly, because if I had a choice, a proper choice, that wasn't a compromise, I probably wouldn't live where we live. And he wouldn't actually live where we live either. So it's really, really interesting that you talk about compromise as a lose-lose, because it's not that we're sitting here being horribly miserable. It's just, it's okay.
Yeah. And I get it. And you know what's so funny is that that's the idea of we've been taught and socialized. And here's the best part is I think you and your husband did the best that you could do with the information at hand and with the resources. And you're like, okay, let's meet in the middle, right? So we've been taught that a compromise
Literally.
is you literally met in the middle,
Literally.
right? So now you're both, you're, as you said, you're not miserable, right? But you're both kind of like, it's okay, right? So like that's a perfect example of a lose-lose situation, right? Because now neither one of you has what you actually wanted. So, and sometimes certain situations are more tricky, right? So this is not a judgment on that. It's like,
Yeah.
trust me, I have been there. It is not but this is why we talk about, and if you want to go into more details, this is important for you and for the audience to understand that this isn't just around the love stuff, right? So if you want to go really deep into the rabbit hole, there's a really powerful book called Never Split the Difference. And it's from an FBI agent that discusses why compromise literally is the worst thing you can do when a life is on the line. Okay, so usually in the relationships, right, in healthy relationships, there's not a life on the line, right? But he works with hostage negotiation tactics, and he teaches about how a compromise, and I'll give you a silly example. He actually shares this in the book, and it works so well for relationships because he talks about like you're gonna go out to dinner to a fancy, beautiful restaurant, and you want your husband to wear his brown shoes and he wants to wear his black shoes. So a compromise, literally the definition of compromise is he wears one black shoe and one brown shoe.
Yep. And that doesn't really work for anybody.
No, it doesn't. Literally, again, the definition of lose-lose. So now you're probably thinking, okay, Emmy, you've just told me all the things that are wrong with this. How do we actually make it better? We're going there. No worries. So let me give you an example of how my husband and I, this is again a silly example, but it works. So when my husband and I first met, we were together basically 24/7 for like the first month. And we were having our meals together and we were going to bed or not going to bed at the same time. We had a pretty similar routine. But that's because we were in each other's world 24/7 and we just weren't leaving each other's side. As we got more familiar with our routine and started having our own independent lives again, as is very healthy in a relationship, we started noticing that he has a very different bedtime than I do. I like to go to sleep a little bit earlier, and I usually need 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep to truly properly function. He needs 5 to 6, and he's good. He's solid, like, and in a good mood. Okay. So it's not just about the amount of hours, it's like, how is he feeling? Right. So he feels fantastic with 5 to 6. That meant that in order for me to see him at night, like he was going to bed, say I was going to bed at 10, he was going to bed at midnight or 1 a.m., right? So this was causing a lot of tension in my body because I would stay up late on the couch just to hang out with him, and then I would end up falling asleep, and then he would carry me to bed, or it was very just dysfunctional and it was not working. So we're like, okay, we need to address this. So in order to quote unquote fix it, my easy, simple solution, okay, not a resolution yet, this is my experiment of solution, was like, we need to go to bed at the same time, right? So can you try coming to bed at the time that I go to bed, right? And he's like, yeah, honey, we can do that, right? So we tried that the first like 2 nights. And I was like, oh, honey, like, how'd it go, right? I was all excited because as far as I knew, he fell asleep. Well, he's like, oh, it was okay. He's like, I just kind of stared at the ceiling for 3 hours. And I was like, what? Oh my God, that sucks. Like, no, it's okay. And I'm like, no, it's not okay. Like, this is miserable for both you and me. And to make a long story short, I'll fast forward all of our experiments. But what happened was because we knew that me staying up later and only sleeping 5 to 6 hours was going to put me in a grumpy state, right? Like, that was not a healthy thing for me. So we're like, okay, so what do we need to do here? And I realized as after our conversations, at the core of this, what was my true need? What was my true ask? Okay. What did my heart want? And what my heart and soul were calling for was that I wanted him to be the last face I saw before I fell asleep. I needed to feel the cuddles and his warmth before I fell asleep. And I fall asleep pretty quickly. So, you ready for the resolution? Here's a resolution. I get tucked in every night.
Ah.
Okay. So I see his face. He holds me, he hugs me, I fall asleep, and he skedaddles and does whatever else he needs to do for the next 2 to 3 hours. So that has literally been, so there's no meeting in the middle. There's no lose-lose there because he gets to sleep the hours he needs and to do the things that he needs to do. And I get the sleep that I want. And I also got the extra loving and care. But the resolution was the getting tucked in at night, not going to sleep at the same time.
Yeah, and there's so many pieces in here that I just love what you're saying here. And what I hear is a big bit in here is your own self-awareness of what is it I actually want from this? Because I don't need for him to go to sleep next to me. Well, you kind of do, but he's not going to. So you can't get that. So that's not on the table here. What you need is to be held and for him to be there whilst you're going to sleep. But then we're fine if he gets up again, which is what he needs to do. And I think there's a huge amount of self-awareness that you knew that that was what you needed. Point number one. Point number two is that you were able to communicate that effectively rather than, which I think a lot of couples do. I'm holding my hand up. You can't see me, folks, but I've done it. Is you end up trying to kind of communicate the need either through smoke signals or hoping the other person is going to mind read, or by picking holes in them or making them feel guilty, or by manipulating, or by causing a fight, or by doing something or anything other than just quietly and calmly, clearly stating, this is what I need. Or alternatively, I think this is something that's been happen in my relationship, or when you don't come to bed at the same time as me, it feels like you don't love me. That would be probably how I would word it. But when you word it like that for somebody, they're able to say, oh, I understand why you're pitching a fit about it now, because there's a part of you that doesn't feel like I love you. And even though I show you I love you in lots of different ways, but that's your particular need that you get. So, like you say, that's when you come to the resolution, because you're right. The compromise would be you stayed up a bit later, he came to bed a bit earlier. You're cranky as hell because I hear you with the needing 8, 9, 10. I need quite a long, uninterrupted sleep. Otherwise, I literally am foul. But I think this is where a lot of couples get caught up is, and the thing I see in my own coaching work with people is for whatever reason, people are afraid to state that need. And I'd love your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's not even really, I wouldn't even call it fear. I don't think people are afraid to state that need. It's more for those of us who grew up in unhealthy household. I'm raising both of my hands and all of my toes. Where there was no such thing as healthy communication. There was no such, it wasn't raised with that, right? I had to learn this as an adult and practice with many relationships before my husband came along. Okay, let's just be clear about that. What I realize is, especially for those of us women, well, first we're taught, and we see this in the media, that your partner is supposed to be psychic, right? He's just supposed to know what you want and how you're feeling. And that is a load of BS. Okay. That is a total load of crap. He's not psychic. He cannot guess what's going on. Can he be intuitive and sort of like feel into like, maybe you're not feeling well? You're not in a good mood. So here's one of the worst things that we're taught in the media. And I'll see a lot of women do this, is that he will say you're not in a good mood or something happened where he hurt your feelings. And then he'll ask, what's wrong? And then what are we taught to do as the ladies?
Nothing. I'm fine.
Yep. Yep. Look at the call and response. We didn't even have to prepare for this.
We don't have to prepare for this at all.
Right? We're taught nothing. I'm fine, right? Yeah. When he knows, and then he'll go like, I know you're not fine. Mm-hmm. I'm fine. Leave me alone. And if you don't already know, then you shouldn't even bother. Oh, yeah. Dear me. Right. So then we are we're setting ourselves up and setting our partner up for a losing situation. Right. So like, how do we come up with it? So if that part comes not truly from being afraid, that's from bringing our childhood baggage and not healing that, right? So I had to learn all that childhood baggage and all that shit. I had to realize that had to do with my parents and it had nothing to do with my present.
Yeah.
So why would I torture my husband for something my mom and dad did? He didn't deserve that. So really having that level of recognition of like, this had nothing to do with fear, that had to do with my own ego trying to protect itself, right? Because at that point, it's sabotage. At that point, it's like, well, if so-and-so is going to be mean to me, even if they haven't shown any signs of that, and they're going to like not treat me well, let me do that first, because then that way I can say that I chose to leave and it was my choice and they can't hurt me. So it's this really kind of fucked up way of us trying to protect ourselves, but it backfires because when we're trying to create the connection, we're pushing them away.
Yeah, that's it. And then there becomes a perpetual cycle of, I really want you to love me, but you know what? You're not psychically doing what I want, and I'm withdrawing and like you say, resorting to it's almost childish tantrum behavior where you're hoping someone's going to make an emotional bid for you. And for a while, people probably will. And then there's a push-pull the whole time. And before too long, you'll have a partner who says, if you're not going to tell me what the problem is, I'm not going to ask. So either you tell me what the issue is, or there isn't an issue. And I think that's quite a difficult thing to work through. And as I say, some of this stuff is things that have happened in my house. This is marriage number 2 for me. And I learned my lesson from not effectively communicating in marriage number 1. You know, I can remember when I told my first husband that I wanted a divorce, and I said, because you've effectively been very emotionally neglectful. And he said, but you never told me. And I can remember thinking, but you should have known. And to an extent, yes, he should, because, you know, we had a small child. But also, I never said to him, dude, this is not acceptable what's happening here. Here's what I need. Because, and I come back to the fear piece that I touched on, because I think there was a part of me that was deeply afraid if I stated what I wanted very vulnerably, he might not give it to me. And I think that for me, in my own patterning, has been a big driver in perhaps not speaking up immediately about, hey, this isn't okay. Here's what I'd prefer. And you've touched on your own childhood conditioning, how most of us grew up in some sort of dysfunction. I think you're pushed to find somebody who can't tell you they had some sort of dysfunction of some sort. And I think it takes a lot of self-work and a lot of inner work, and to use the phrase shadow work, to start having a look at your triggers and really investigating why am I upset by this particular behavior? Why is this thing that's been said to me upsetting me? And it takes deep courage to go down that route, because I think we often end up going down into some quite unpleasant territory before you're able to come back up the other side and function better.
100%. And to your point around it takes courage to be vulnerable.
Yes.
It is 100% courageous to be vulnerable. And I'm going to tell you one of the phrases that I have incorporated in my life when I hear, and another thing why a lot of us as women sometimes don't communicate effectively, and I'm going to raise my hands and all my toes for this, is that sometimes we don't know what exactly is the point or what exactly hurt us. And I think that bothers us because, especially this used to happen with me, with my ex, with my toxic ex, he would throw everything back around, right? So if something hurt me, then he would find something to be the victim for. And then I found myself apologizing, trying to make it better for him.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, right?
Yeah.
Vomit emojis,
nothing like
right?
a gaslighting narcissist, is there?
Right. Right. So my husband is not that at all. So because he has consistent, and we've been together for 7 years now, so this is very consistent behavior from him. So I'm going to tell you one of my favorite phrases that I like to use. Again, this only works when you're in a healthy relationship with a healthy man. If he does something on accident, because I promise you, he never does anything on purpose to hurt me, and I know this for an absolute fact, Not for a fact with with the narcissist. He would do things because just to hurt me. My husband does not. When he does something that hurts me on accident, it is my job, okay, hear me now, it is my job and my responsibility to state that something is off. And here's how I choose this level of courage, Emma. And what I say is, honey, my heart hurts. Okay. Now that might mean that's a cue for him. I must be present now. And that's a cue for him to come hold me and to allow for the conversation to start. Because at that point, Emma, it might be an hour or two, usually less, for us to figure out what the actual hurt was. But I kind of need some vomit talking time. What I mean by that, I'm just going to start talking and allow it all to come out, because it's going to take me a while to figure out what part of what happened actually hurt my feelings. And then we do a redo. So you know how people tell you, like, you can't go back to the past and make it better? That's not true. You can. With a healthy partner, okay, we do redos all the time, right? So we'll go through a scenario of like, honey, this hurt my feelings. And he'll say like, oh, I had no idea, or I didn't mean to say that. This is what I actually meant. And I have to have enough courage to ask him curious questions, curious, clarifying questions. Okay? Because I used to just jump to conclusions. I would jump to conclusions.
Oh, yeah. The land of conclusions. It's not a good place to jump to at speed.
Right? I was a freaking frog with that. Jump, 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 jump. So when I feel triggered when he says something, it is my job to ask a clarifying, curious question. And I'll say something as simple as, can you tell me more about that? Or can you tell me what you meant by that, honey? And I guarantee, Emma, it is 100% of the time not what I was thinking. Once he clarifies it, I was like, oh, I was thinking something completely different. Either I heard it wrong, I felt a wrong intonation, I felt whatever. And then once he clarifies it, we actually go back to that scenario, and I'll tell him like, honey, can we do a redo? He's like, yeah, let's do a redo. So we'll go back and rerun that entire scene as if it was a movie, and redo it with the scenes that fill my heart with that level of love. And we just, it's a reset. It's a wound reset.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's so lovely. And you obviously got a very emotionally open husband. So I'm married to an engineer who will joke, and he's half joking, about the fact that he just has one feeling. So it is. They're the Black Eyed Peas song, I've Got a Feeling. Yeah, that is.
He's got that one. Yeah.
He's got that one. That is his anthem. But I think again, and in here, I'm hearing that a lot of the time, and again, I know from my experience, and I know from my own coaching client experience, and you're a relationship coach, I'm a life coach, but relationship in all sorts pops up, is a lot of the way we hear and perceive information is all about the lens through which we view the world. And sometimes we need to readjust that and do some work on ourselves to start to have a look at, why is it I think everybody's out to get me? Why is it I expect to be disappointed? Why is it I expect to be let down? And it's usually, we're unfortunately, with personal development work, we're generally working with things that don't serve us to be able to get them to a point where they do. And it's interesting, as we're talking, I had a very, I got married in April, and my 3 biggest suppliers at the wedding all let me down. And I looked at that and I thought, that, and I felt very disappointed by it. And I sat and I just thought, there's something under this here, because it can't, there's a common denominator with this, and here she sits. And yet some people did fuck up. There were things that could have been and should have been better. But there were also things I could have just let go. But I spent a lot of time fixating on the people that disappointed me and the things that hadn't gone right. And I had to do a bit of work to dig deeper to why am I so upset by this? And why is there a bit of a loop running of, well, expected that would happen? I mean, who the hell wants to be going through life expecting to be disappointed? I mean, really, but I don't, it was, yeah, exactly. And I had to kind of sit with it and it was really I'm trying to articulate as I'm talking here because it was sort of relatively recent. I think it was almost a worthiness piece of managing, as a child. I think I was disappointed a lot because my parents were quite unavailable a lot of the time. So I sort of expected people to not show up for things. And I sort of expected people not really to properly be there for me. So it was an expectation management thing that was going on, but it was old and so unhelpful for a day that, kind of should have been magical. I could tell you, I'm not going to bother, but I won't, let's not indulge me. But I could give you a massive list of all the things that went wrong and all the ways I was disappointed. And the husband and I had a conversation about it, and he was like, you need to just readjust this attitude because I don't want the memory of the day to be how all the people fucked you off. Because that's not what it was about. It was a wonderful day, but yet the abiding memories are, this person didn't do this person didn't do that. And yeah, it was a very interesting exercise for me to work through.
Yeah, and you know what? We all have that. I what you're describing is pretty much how I lived, I think, most of my life. And I tell you that level of attitude for me, it put me in the hospital because my body couldn't function anymore. It was literally, I was expecting everything to go wrong, including my body. And because of that, so it's so funny that you bring that up around like the expectation and people not following through on what they did. There are things that definitely did not go the way I quote unquote wanted at my wedding. One of the things I did do was there had to be so much mental prep, at least a whole month before, where I had to choose to be blind and oblivious and to choose that whatever happened that day, no matter what, nobody was going to ruin it. And it was going to be about me and Matt, and it was going to be perfect no matter what. Mm-hmm. And I tell you, I did a really good job that day. And I'm happy about that. And they're present now. There are things that I can complain about how the videographers and the photographers and all the things that happen afterwards. Whatever. Right. So I get it. Right. And the reason we're bringing this up, if those of you who are wondering, like, what's this got to do with the relationship?
Where's this going?
It has to do with our perception, right? And our lens and how we see things. And like, yes, are there going to be people that do things incorrectly? And then there are people who want to make it better. And then there are people you're never going to see in your life. A lot of the suppliers for the wedding, you're just like, truly just let it go. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to the point around, and this is really important, Emma, this has been such a huge life-changing thing for me and my husband and the clients that I work with, is just because my husband thinks differently than I do, and he might not 100% understand everything that I'm bringing up and discussing, doesn't mean the way he thinks is wrong. The way he thinks is right, and the way I think is right as well.
Yep.
Okay. They are both correct lenses of the world. When we come together, we choose to see the other's perspective. And even if we don't truly 100% understand it, we respect it. Yeah. And I got to tell you, that was the fucking hardest thing for me to do as someone who knew everything that ever needed to be known by the age of 17. At 17, I knew everything. Okay. And then the world, got to me and everything dismantled from there. It was a really difficult thing to come to this conclusion, but it has really shifted how the happiness level in me, and recognizing like, oh, he didn't do X, Y, and Z to hurt me. He just didn't understand how this was affecting me. But if I bring it up, then there's going to be an open conversation about it.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that being able to see other perspectives. I don't want to go completely off at a tangent here, so I'm going to mention this and then I have a question for you. Is we sit in this house with two people who operate from very different love languages. The engineer is an acts of service guy. He's a practical guy. I am a quality time person. And it's quite difficult to mesh those two together. And we as it's evolved and we've got better at the communication bit, is for him to feel loved, for me to make him feel loved, rather than trying to get him to spend an afternoon with me doing something, as much as it grates me because I don't like cooking, is if I cook a meal for him, he feels deeply loved. And it's not complicated. And then when he feels deeply loved, he's also then willing to step forward and do the quality time thing with me, even though he doesn't quite get it because he's an acts of service person. And then I kind of get what I want and need. And that, I would say, I would call it, before this conversation, I would call that a compromise. But that, I would say, is a very effective resolution to us both meeting each other's need. It's that understanding the other person needs to feel loved or feels loved in a completely different way from me. So I can keep trying my way and he can keep trying his way and we can keep being frustrated. Or you can, lean in a little bit and see from their perspective and say, okay, might not enjoy cooking. It doesn't have to be fancy. The last time I tried to cook him something fancy, I inadvertently gave him food poisoning. Definitely wasn't on purpose. But I made him sick.
The verdict is out in that. We will see what the
truth is. So he's like Putin when he comes in here. I think he'd like a food taster, just in case I have poisoned it. But no. Look at this lovely meal I made you. Why have you brought somebody in from outside to test it first?
Just in case.
Just in case. But I think this perspectives bit is so important, is you have to respect your partner and respect them enough to have a look at. I might not be able to see from your point of view. I might not agree with your point of view, but your point of view is valid because I love you and it's your point of view. And respect is a two-way street. I think you kind of almost have to, again, lesson I've been learning, you almost have to step up and be the partner that you want in order to get the partner that you want back without it being quite as transactional as I've just described it.
No, but I love it. I don't think it sounds transactional. I call those the moments or acts of cherishing. And in a healthy relationship, both parties want to cherish the other.
Yep.
And what it means to cherish the other is you will do things even when you're tired, even when you aren't necessarily quite up for it. I'll give you an example. It's just how, like you said, you don't like cooking. For me, cooking is meditative when I feel like it, right? When I want to. So the act of having to cook a meal for either myself or someone else, that sounds like torture, right? However, yes, it's like, that is not like, once it's a chore, like I'm out, right? Yeah. But the thing is, my husband first doesn't, there's no obligation. There's no sense of like, I must cook him a meal. But there are certain days, and these are more often than not, where if he's coming home late for whatever, he's planning his own meal. However, I like to add, honey, can I cook you dinner? And he's like, oh, honey, you don't have to. And I said, no, actually, I have the energy and I want to do this for you. So that is my extra. And he feels so loved by that, right? Mm-hmm. But I can only give that from an overflow of me, right? On the days where I'm in pain or I'm cramping or whatever, I've had a really, really, really bad day, me then trying to go overboard and then do a meal beyond that when I can't even make something for myself, that then is not an act of cherishing. That would be from an act of chore, and then it creates this level of tension, right? So it's understanding that. So I know, like, I know that you can have that conversation with your husband of like, honey, I really wanted to make dinner tonight because I love you so much. I'm just not feeling so well at all. And we need the response to be like, oh, my love, are you okay? Do you need something? Can I get you something? Versus like, well, suck it up. You have to make dinner anyway. Like that's not a loving response, right? So
No.
those are acts of cherishing from each other where like I don't want to cook a meal every single day, and I don't. But on the days where I tell my husband, honey, I really I don't feel like doing anything today, but I'm really hungry. He's like, what can I bring home? What do you need? How can I help? Those are the moments where it's like, oh, okay. Means he's gonna go out of his way, add extra time to his commute to add the love to me. So but like you said, everything is a two-way street.
Yeah. And again, this is a really important piece in here of this communicating bit. Rather than him coming home and there being, I don't think either of us are in marriages where we have husbands who expect a meal to be served up, with a bow in your hair every day. But
No.
if you don't say to somebody when it is a day that you are, it's your turn to cook, whatever, if you don't communicate, actually, I'm not feeling well, I can't do it tonight, please, could you get something on the way home? If they come home and surprise, there's nothing to eat and there's no food in the house, you're on a hiding to nothing. I mean, that is a problem. And I think this is such a simple bit, the communicating piece, but I think people miss it so often. And it underpins an awful lot of the health of a relationship. I have one last question for you because I sidetracked us slightly. For somebody listening who is in a relationship where there is perhaps a lot of lose-lose compromise, and they're listening to this and going, oh God, this is me. We do this all the time and we compromise and actually nobody's happy. What are the first few steps people can take to move from compromise to resolution?
Ooh, really good question. Let's see. I've never had this question asked exactly like this, so you're making me use my noodle up here a little bit.
Excellent.
I love it. I love it. So first is if you're listening to this and having that level of acknowledgement and recognition for yourself, then there is some possibility of us being able to shift it. Okay. And what do I mean by that? It's the fact that you're acknowledging and recognizing, you're like, ooh, okay. So that means you have some self-awareness. And if you have self-awareness, that means that there are some possibilities for us to be able to shift gradually. It also depends on how long has this been happening. If you've been married for 45 years and this is now an expectation of how the marriage is supposed to run, it's a little bit deeper, or this goes, right? If you've been married for a few months, a year or two or three, and you have both been sort of unhappy with how this is going, but you just didn't know any better, you've just sort of been tolerating it because this is what you were told to do, or this is what you were taught in therapy or counseling, because counselors still talk about compromise. Need to get that word out of there. Then first is acknowledging it, right? And then second, having a conversation with your partner around this recognition of sometimes just the definition of like, hey, honey, you know what? I learned that there's a difference between resolution and compromise. And I wanted to bring that to your attention because I found it fascinating. And I want to hear what you think about this, right? So starting off there. Again, this is only going to work if you have a partner who's open to just having curious conversations and who wants to have these kinds of conversations with you. It is not about bringing something up around like, we need to talk. Okay. So for those of you listening, okay, especially the women, well, phrase, I need you, please, 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 I need you to remove from your vocabulary at all costs is we need to talk.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, I had to learn that the hard way as well. Do we need to talk with our partners? Absolutely. But using the phrase, texting the phrase we need to talk or saying it out loud, immediately puts our partner into the defense mechanism. Okay. Mm-hmm. They will immediately go into defenses and they have stopped listening. You've already lost. It's not a battle, but you've lost the war. Okay. So you're like, well, what do we do then, Emmy? got you. Don't worry. Okay. So again, this is along the lines of like setting you up for having this conversation to be able to switch from compromise to resolution. Is I set up time to chat with my husband. We schedule it on the calendar. Like, hey, honey, I have something. So tone is important. Your enthusiasm has to be there. Okay. Hey, honey, I have something really cool I wanted to talk to you about and I heard about in a podcast, but I need some of your undivided time. When is a good time this week for us to sit down for like an hour and chat about it, or maybe only 30 minutes? And he looks at his calendar. I look at mine. Like, okay, cool. We're like, awesome, right? So it's kind of like a date to have this conversation, right? So you bring up the topic that you want to discuss. And then from there, and remember, this is all happening if you're not in hurt. If you're in consistent hurt, this is going to be a lot more difficult to bring up and schedule it with this level of enthusiasm, right? But if we're coming at this from a place of up level, then you can have this conversation and start there and bring it up from a place of curiosity and bring it up from a place of like, do you think there are some areas in our life where we've accidentally compromised, but we actually wanted a resolution? And start from there, right? You're going to start small and move over. And sometimes you're going to need some help from Emma or another coach or myself to figure out what that actually looks like. Because if you've been doing this for such a long time, you might not even know what a resolution looks like. So you might need some outside help from counselors or coaches. So that would be my first steps to go there, is to set the stage for that open communication first, because this isn't just like going to your husband and being like, you know what, we've been compromising. Now we need to do resolutions. Well, now you're just controlling the situation. That just, it defeats the purpose of having that open communication. So that's not what we're trying to do at all.
Yeah, opening with "we need to talk." I feel like I have been in a big compromise for a really long time. What are you going to do about it? Yeah, don't do that, folks. Okay, that is not, don't do that. Don't do that. Unless you're about to serve up a fresh set of divorce papers. This has been incredibly eye-opening, and I love a reframe, and this conversation has reframed the concept of compromise versus resolution. And I think the last thing I would add on here is that I think you'll know, again, this requires a level of self-awareness from both you and your partner. I think one can tell when you're in a state of lose-lose compromise or a state of win-win resolution by how you're left feeling as a result of the conversation or the discussion or the argument that has happened, that has kind of led you down the path to both of you agreeing to disagree. What a horrible turn of phrase that is as well. If you've agreed to disagree, well, it probably doesn't feel great, and there needs to be some more discussion on top of that. And I think I love what you said about scheduling time in. And I'm a woman who finds this very difficult. If there is a disagreement here, I like to get this resolved as quickly as possible. And sometimes you need to give things a gap to calm down before you and your partner can actually sit and calmly talk through something so you can hit a resolution. I think often when two people are very hyped up and coming from a place of hurt, I think that's where a reluctant, begrudging compromise might arise. So this has been so interesting listening to you talk about this, giving us this reframe. Wonderful. I have loved this. Thank you very much. Can you please share where folks can find you online? I'll put the links and everything in the show notes as well. And I believe you have a freebie as well.
Yes, so everyone can find me and contact my team at soulmateloveuniversity.com. And I'm everywhere in the socials. You'll see it in the show notes. You can find me on Instagram as well. But my website is the way that I can guarantee that a message will get to me, because my team will send it over. And I do have a freebie. So anybody who goes to soulmateloveuniversity.com and do the contact page, just tell me that you heard me on Emma O'Brien's podcast. And I have a free book that's coming your way, and actually access to my mini course. So my mini course is not free, but because you heard me on the podcast, you will get that access for free, learning about how the male and female brain works and learning about how to communicate effectively in a healthy relationship and how to set up your partner for success with you.
Wonderful. What a wonderful gift. I will put all of that in the show notes. So folks, please go and have a look and you can get in touch with Emmy. Definitely go for the free book and the mini course because what you've shared is so powerful. You're an absolute expert in your field. And I've got a lot out of this conversation and I'm sure everybody listening has as well. So thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you for listening, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this. As always, you can get in touch with me on Instagram at Emma O'Brien Coach. Hop over, say hi, let me know what your biggest takeaway was, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please leave me a 5-star rating and a review, and make sure you share this episode with a friend who you know will also enjoy it. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. Please drop me a DM and say hi at Emma O'Brien Coach. And for more information about coaching with me, please head to my website, which is emmaobrien.coach.com.